Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good fun topic. Let's do it. What's the biggest urban legend from your town? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Resurrection Mary. A few decades ago, a girl got picked up from a ballroom near a cemetery after a ball and was murdered. Since then, there have been reports of her dancing without patrons in the ballroom, walking around the cemetery. She appears in people's cars that don't pick her up when she hitchhikes by the cemetery. There's the story of her getting picked up, and she directed the man to the main entrance at the cemetery. The main gate has bars that have been pulled apart by what looks like human hands, because they left handprints. The cemetery replaces them, but they keep coming back to the unpainted state. Urban legend of Kuldara, India. Kuldara village in Rajasthan, India was abandoned overnight, leaving behind an entire village of crumbling homes and buildings. Legend has it that the ruler of the region took a keen interest in the daughter of the subjugated village chief, and to escape humiliation, the entire village of 1,500 disappeared overnight. It is said the village chief cursed the abandoned village in such a way that anyone who tried to inhabit it would die. Even today, visiting the village is only something the brave would try, and staying the night is at one's own risk. Members of the Paranormal Society of Delhi stayed the night and reported supernatural happenings such as unexplained moving shadows, footprints, noises, and touching. San Antonio, Texas. A school bus stalled on Southton Road railroad tracks, and not all of the children escaped before a train that couldn't stop in time hit the bus and killed 10 children and the bus driver. Now, if you stop on the tracks and put your car in neutral facing west, it will begin to roll forward across the tracks. If you put some type of powder on the back of your car, you can see small childlike handprints on the trunk and bumper, as if you were being pushed. The weirdest part is that your car rolls uphill. Washington, D.C. here. There's this idea that there's a building height limit to make the Capitol and Washington Monument the biggest buildings in the city. It's not true. Actually, there are so many streets that there are no city blocks big enough to build skyscrapers, plus the geology is weak for foundations. Plus, if you go around DuPont Circle, there are buildings taller than the Capitol. I live in a suburb of Chicago, and there's an old man in my neighborhood who always salts and shovels the sidewalk by himself. We call him the South Bend Shovel Slayer, and he's said to have murdered his family and half the people on the block with a snow shovel back in 1958. He was also said to have kept his victims in his garbage can full of salt, and that the salt was supposed to have turned the dead bodies into mummies. He seems like a nice guy to me, I guess, but you never know. Okay, Buzz. Good old Black Annis. Black Annis, known as Black Agnes, is a bogeyman figure in English folklore. She is imagined as a blue-faced crone or witch with iron claws and a taste for humans, especially children. She's said to haunt the countryside of Leicestershire, living in a cave in the Dane Hills with an oak tree at its entrance. She supposedly goes out onto the glens at night looking for unsuspecting children and lambs to eat, then tanning their skins by hanging them on a tree before wearing them around her waist. She would reach inside houses to snatch people. Legend has it that she used her iron claws to dig into the side of a sandstone cliff, making herself a home there, which is known as Black Annis's Bower. The legend led to parents warning their children that Black Annis would catch them if they did not behave. Broken Hill, NSW, Australia. A boundary rider by the name of Charles Rasp discovered in 1884 an area so rich in ore and minerals that they were just sitting on the surface. They set up shop, started mining the area, and found further ore bodies that are still being mined today. The main deposits were lead, silver, and zinc, though nowadays mainly just lead is mined. Apparently, though he wasn't named Charles Rasp, he was a deserter from the French army, or so some other such tale, depending on who's telling the story. The truth, he confessed, was sealed inside a piece of artwork called the Silver Tree, made by the silver miner in the area. The sculpture is still on display in the local art gallery. Ames, Iowa. Serial killer that preys on drunk college students. A drunk college student dies and a small smiley face is found at the scene of the crime. He makes it look like an accident. One happened while I was attending ISU. The guy disappeared. They found his wallet and his phone on the sidewalk. He was found later in a pond. They think he passed out and fell into the pond or something, but a smiley face was found on the lamppost where his wallet and cell phone were found. Edit words. Where I grew up in the Corn Belt or Rust Belt, there was a local thief named Jack who was a living legend. Jack had a speech impediment that made him sound incredibly stupid and possibly wasted drunk, but stories abounded of his smooth-talking heists. Everybody knew of his robberies, but the stories were all about him putting one over on some business, so he was actually seen as somewhat untrustworthy, but also somewhat of a Robin Hood figure. I think Jack stories became kind of a local genre of tall tales for a while, the kind of lies crafted over a pitcher of beer. This guy had done it at least once, but he was still trusted to be the coach of my Little League team. He would show up to games with cases of Gatorade in his trunk, sometimes even brand new baseball gloves, and the parents would all just have that "oh, Jack" reaction. I never witnessed him stealing anything, but the guy was a hell of a baseball coach. I played under him for 4 years and won 3 league trophies. His legend kind of soured, though, when he finally stole the league registration fees from a team's parents. That was the end of his coaching, and really, I don't remember any good stories from after that period either. Mind you, this was in the 90s. In my hometown in southeast Saskatchewan, a short drive away, there's a place called Roche Percy. It is a small, beautiful village. Up the hill are the rocks. It's old native grounds. There is said to be a skinwalker there. I've been during the day, and when you end up alone, you feel very uneasy. Some of my friends have gone and heard noises that gave them the creeps. Lots of these guys were your typical riggers. In my hometown, there's an abandoned shop that might have a demon or something. We used to go there and take a lot of pictures, or we would hang out and smoke weed. Connected to the shop was a set of offices. This was the scariest part I've ever set foot in. It was all ripped apart and looked as if it were out of a silent hill. You would hear footsteps and feel this crazy chill like no other. I distinctly remember being dared to run to the stairs and back. The office had a second floor, and it sounded like someone jumped off of something high and was hightailing it at me down the stairs. I don't think I've ever ran so fast in my life. We have cougars sometimes in our area, but I doubt it was that. It sounded like hooves or something. I was also high as a kite, so I like to blame it on that, but it was a really scary place. Teens used to love going there to play Ouija, too. Spooky stuff. The ghost of Minnie Quay. One would never recognize the small drive-by town of Forester today as it was when the Quays lived there. Their little blue house still stands today, empty, with the famous windows looking past the inn and surveying the coast of Lake Huron. The Quay family lived in the Michigan town between bustling ports, was quite active in the late 1800s, of course, and had a wonderful daughter, Minnie. Like most women in the area, she wound up meeting a boy and falling in love, but the boy was a sailor. James, her father, full of pride, forbade his daughter from continuing the relationship. Minnie and her lover proceeded to date in secret in the hopes that her father would come around. The sailor was leaving for a long trip that night when Minnie's father discovered the deception. She was locked in her room on the second story, left to gaze out the window as she watched the ship leave without saying goodbye. Months passed, and Minnie had heard no word from her lover. She asked the men at the docks every week, until word came that a ship had sunk to the bottom of the Huron in a storm, carrying the body of her beloved. Minnie wept uncontrollably back to her home and looked out her window to the lake. Distraught and miserable, she walked along the beach to the nearest dock. Minnie is said to have looked down into the cold, thrashing water, declaring her undying adoration for her lost love, and jumped, joining him in his final resting place. Her body was found, recovered, and buried in the small cemetery near her home. There have been sightings of her ghost crying and calling for him in the window of the home, along the beach near the home, and on the dock from which she jumped. The home still bears the family name, though it is rumored you will lose your loved ones if you touch it. Well, instead of commenting on any particular story, I'll give you the local one from my town in Huntington, New York. There's a road called Sweet Hollow Road that is supposedly very haunted. A woman was beheaded there. Some would say Molly Hatchet. And then there was a overpass on the road that in the 70s, there was a car pulled over under it. And when the cop went to look in the car, there were 4 teenagers, all headless, in the car. And apparently that if you put your car in neutral under that overpass, you'll roll through it. I run in those woods, and I've been there at night, I've been there in the morning, and I've never seen anything, but you never know. Hampton Roads, Virginia. There's a fairly famous bridge out of Yorktown on Crawford Road. You would expect the most famous story to be hauntings at Fort Monroe or the ghosts of colonists at Jamestown, but no. You get some bridge that isn't even that old. Anyway, Crawford Bridge, you hear all sorts of stories about car crashes, but the most popular story is that a woman hung herself on the bridge and still haunts it to this day. I went to a lot of abandoned areas in college, the most noteworthy being Glendale Hospital, Maryland, but I'd never encountered anything quite like Crawford Bridge. I won't talk about an unsettling feeling or any of that. My car just flat out died. It wasn't even a lemon or anything, 2007 Nissan Murano. After dicking around with it for 2 minutes, I was able to get the power on. Then the radio started up on its own and began changing stations and volume on its own. It was probably some sort of interference, but it makes for a good ghost story, I guess. Better than the ghostly figure in the window like at the hospital I mentioned. Bristol, UK. At the city zoo, a parking attendant dutifully tended the car parks, taking fees and wishing people well. After 35 years one day, he didn't turn up for work, and so the zoo called the local council to ask for a stand-in. The council said they never provided a parking attendant, and he must be a zoo employee. The zoo had never employed a parking attendant either. This rogue, whom no one seemed to know by name, had been collecting parking charges for 35 years unquestioned. It is estimated he made in the region of £2 million over the years and decided to retire, probably somewhere much nicer than Bristol. My hometown is a coastal town in the south of England called Seaford. The story goes that in the 16th century, the local townspeople gained a habit of luring ships to the bay and looting them when they ran aground. They would light fires on the cliffs, and ships, mistaking them for harbor lights in New Haven a few miles down the coast, would run aground, and the people would steal all the cargo. The townspeople were known as cormorants or Schlabagad, and apparently it was a terrifying place. Share this post 10 times, or Schlabagad will come and eat you in your sleep. Here in Ireland, there are ruined castles scattered all over the place. In the walls of one of them near a small rural town called Blarney, there's a stone that is supposed to magically make you an eloquent speaker, i.e. the gift of gab if you kiss it. It's not easy to get there. You have to climb to the top of the castle and then lie on your back with your head hanging over a sheer drop. I kid you not, millions, literally, of tourists have undergone this farcical ritual. Apart from the hygiene issues, how could any sane person believe that a lump of rock could possess this ability? Needless to say, I'm not one of the locals who is profiting from this paddywhackery. I come from the small town near the Schwarzwald, Germany. The myth goes that if you go into the forest at night, you will see the Grobsman, which literally means tall man. He is our version of a slender man, except way older. He has no face and has shadows coming out of his back. He also brings death and sorrow. The scariest part is that he remains consistent throughout the centuries and is even found in German books and paintings. Grossman has been mainly forgotten, but he's also known as Schlenkerman, skinny man. I tried finding a Wikipedia page for it, but I can't. Sorry, guys. If you're interested, you can look up any of the names above. Der Eckling, a poem by Goethe describing a similar figure, or Hans Baldung's painting. He supposedly drew a giant, and later the extra limbs were erased, but X-rays supposedly revealed them. I grew up in Prestbury, near Chesterham, in Gloucester, supposedly the most haunted village in the UK. One of the many tales is of the Headless Horseman, He was a cavalier rider who was on his way from Sutherlee Castle to Gloucester during the Civil War and was beheaded by a thin wire tied across the road by Roundheads. Another version is that he was knocked off the horse and subsequently executed by beheading after interrogation. The legend is that on certain nights you can hear but never see a horse galloping and the scream of a man or horse as they hit the wire. I never heard it, but I know people who claim to have done it.